Okay, today's fun 2011 Kia Soul 2-liter clutch. How many kilometers do we have on this thing? 201,000 K she has on it. I have my foot on the clutch and it's quiet, and if you listen when I release the clutch, in, clutch out, clutch in. So the release bearing's gone, so might as well do the whole clutch. I have a new Sachs clutch kit with release bearing or throwout bearing, whichever one you want to call it, pressure plate and friction disc, and it's got the little well, you'll see it when we're in there, it's got the little plate alignment tool. Anyway, I'm going to jack this thing up and get ready. Okay, car's up on jack stands on the driver's side, wheel off. We're going to remove the center bolt, which is a 32mm. This holds the front center drive shaft, and like I said, it is a 32mm. Let's put this camera down and back up. My electric impact is 500 and something foot-pounds, so that was pretty pretty close to its limit taking that off. So anyway, that is off, and I will be back in 1 minute. I'm going to set up because we're going to be removing part of the suspension, because we're going to have to be able to get this out far enough to slide the drive shaft out of the transmission. Back in a second. Okay, so actually before I get on the suspension, I'm going to remove all this stuff up top first so I can see better in there and everything. And the first thing we have to remove is the air cleaner and battery. The air cleaner has a 10mm bolt straight down there. I think that's a 10, it might be a 12, I think it's a 10. There's another 10mm bolt right. Let me see if I can get the flashlight. That 10mm bolt there. And then we're going to take off the hose clamp at the back where it goes into the intake, and also that pinch bolt on the positive crankcase PCV. Ventilation hose, I'm going to take those off because that's going to have to unplug from here, so we can take this whole assembly off. And then battery, and battery with any car, as you know, is negative battery cable first, positive second. Always remove the negative first and install the negative last when removing a battery. Prevents sparks and prevents any accidents from happening. So let's pull that negative cable off and pull the air cleaner assembly out, and be back in a minute. Okay, I almost forgot to mention these two airbox screws. The air intake here at the front of the grille. There are a couple of Phillips headed screws. And they just screw up enough to get your fingers into there and pop them out. They should just slide out. And I'll also tell you that this is listed on the dealer's service. The dealer allows 6 hours for this job. So if you're doing it, give yourself 10. I've never done a Kia Soul clutch before, so I am going to give myself 8 to 10 hours. Hopefully, as long as nothing goes wrong, we will knock on plastic, metal, whatever that is. And so anyway, again, I'm going to pull this air cleaner assembly off, pull the battery out, and be back in a second. Well, I found one more 10mm bolt for the air cleaner assembly right here at the front of the grill, straight down there. You can see that 10mm bolt down there, and that one's got to come out as well. Okay, here's the airbox assembly out of the car. Sweet mother of God, it looks like something from War of the Worlds. Coming through the house to kick your ass. Anyway, onto the battery. Okay, just finishing removing, already removed the negative, and these are 10mm bolts on the battery cables, terminals. And there's a 10mm hold down bolt right. Oops. Sorry. on the back of the battery. Remove that, and we should be able to pull the battery up and out. Back in a minute. Oh, I was wrong. Kia likes their 10mm bolts. We have another one. Or, no, that's a 12. Is that 10 or a 12? That is a 12. 12mm bolt right there to remove the back of the battery strap. So the bottom one, battery hold down, is on the bottom, that 10mm, and then we've got a 12 right there. Pull those out and battery should come out. Well, apparently in Kia's world that's not enough to hold the battery down. So you have to take out the whole ECM with the battery apparently, and there are two bolts. You can just see them. They're either 10s or 12s. I think they're 12s down there. Two bolts at the bottom of that tray. The light is right on right now, top and bottom. So those two have to come out. And after taking this bottom mount bolt off, the battery, positive battery cable can be moved away. See its little mount on the bottom there. So that gets moved away from the battery tray. Anyway, so we'll take those two back bolts off and back in a second. A lot of work to remove a battery in this car apparently. Okay, back two bolts out, and apparently that's the deal. Rotate the battery forward and out. And now this electronic control module needs to be back out of the way of the transmission as well. I think we can just tuck that back up in. Or should we just unhook it? I think this slides. I don't know how this one will remove, so I don't want to. You know what, let's just push this up out of the way. If I have to remove, if I have to actually unhook it later, I will. I don't think I actually need to. So now the battery tray itself has got 1, 2, 3 bolts. Can you see those? No. 1 right there, 2, and 3, all 12mm bolts for the battery tray. Let's move this positive battery cable up out of the, I don't know, it's hooked underneath there somewhere. Actually, I'll just leave those 3 bolts in the tray. I know where they came from. Okay, and battery tray out of the way. Well, at least we can see the transmission now, and we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff to unhook from here. The hydraulic slave cylinder. We have some electrical hookups to remove. The shift cables. Okay, so we're going to put the, actually going to clean up under here a little bit so I'm not, everything's not filthy, and be back in a minute. Okay, a few things we want to remove here now. These 2 little pins on the 2 selector shafts, and apparently they just push straight out. Pin with a top plate, and make sure that doesn't come apart. It does not. And then the back one should be the same. Washer and pin. Pop that off. Come on, me. I've put the transmission in neutral. Okay, so that's off. And we're going to disconnect the, I think that is the reverse switch. Push in on the little tab and pull up, hopefully. Yes. Lift that away. And then there should be a ground. There is a ground strap right there. Looks to be a 12. Oops. Ouch. Tuck that ground strap up to the front somewhere. It's not in the way. I'm going to put the bolt back in so it's where it needs to be. And we'll be back in a second. I want to see what I need to remove next. Okay, it looks to be, move this camera a little bit, 3 bolts here, here, and here that hold this whole shifter cable assembly onto the top of the transmission, because obviously that can't be attached while we're separating the transmission from the engine. So they're 12 mils as well. So I'll pull those 3 off and be back in a minute. Okay, so that shifter assembly is loose. I'm going to tie that up out of the way in a second. Once I get, the power cable here goes on top of the transmission, and there's can't get to it that way, a 12 mil bolt holding the power cable on, and it's just plastic strapped on there, but you know you're just going to wreck the plastic strap trying to get it off, and it's just going to be a nightmare. So it's easier just to unbolt the bolt if I can get on it. Come on. There we go. I'm just going to put that bolt again back in the hole where it came out of in the transmission. So I remember where it came from. Okay, and now we are going to unhook the clutch hydraulics. Again, when I get a second in a minute when the camera's off, I'm going to tie this shifter assembly, come here, with the positive power cable. I'm just going to strap it up out of the way so it's not in our way to get to those transmission bolts in the back, which we're going to have to get to in a few minutes. And I think we're doing okay. We have the slave cylinder bolt to undo, and I think just this one bolt on this hydraulic line. I don't know if that will stay with the mount or not. If you can see that. The hydraulic line for the clutch slave cylinder that goes along the front. It's only attached to the transmission at the slave cylinder and here. But I think this bolt and that bolt and that bolt at the back, those 3 bolts, yeah, I don't think I need to remove that. Okay. I think we're almost ready to go under the car now. So I'm going to tie that up, and I think we're ready to head under. Back in a minute. Okay, under here on the splash shield, it looks like there's 5 bolts to remove to get the splash shield off. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. $10mm bolts. Hopefully they'll all come out and none will break. My cordless ratchet only goes to 30, I think 32 foot-pounds. So these are a little stuck in there. And there we are. Okay, and now up here on the slave cylinder there are two, those aren't 10s, are they? I think those are 12s. That's a 10. Okay, so I have the other two 12s, so we will pull that out, and I'll get a 12 mil and pull those out and get these nuts all in a little container so I don't lose them. Back in a second. Okay, slave cylinder bolt, 12 mils, two of them. I think there's two. I don't think there's one on the top. There is not. Okay, so let's pull these out. That should just be, yep, slipped in there. Careful with this hydraulic line. I'm going to put these two bolts back in here. Always easier to put them back where they came from instead of having to remember where they came from. I'm lucky for some reason I can remember where every bolt went 6 months later. For some reason I'm lucky that way. Okay. So we're going to strap this up out of the way so this hydraulic line doesn't get hurt either. And we're almost ready to brace up the engine. We'll be putting a jack stand under there, jacking it up a little bit, put a jack stand underneath the engine to keep it from moving, and then remove the mounting bolts for the transmission. Oh no, first we have to get the drive shaft out. Crap! Okay, let's tie this sucker up. Back in a minute. Okay, removing the strut bolts, 19mm nuts with a 17mm bolt head on the back, holding the 17 with a wrench while removing the 19mm nut. I'm going to need a hammer to tap that sucker out. So first we'll do the pinch bolt on the lower ball joint, coming off the lower control arm where it goes into the knuckle. There's a 14mm bolt. I want my socket to go on my impact. There we go. Hammer to tap those out. Okay, so you can see I've got the lower pinch bolt on the lower control arm ball joint. I've got that out, and I gently separated. There's a slot between there. I gently separated that with a small pry bar, just to loosen the pinch on the lower ball joint. The two upper bolts are out, and lightly tapped on the center. Lightly, don't mushroom it, just lightly tap it to release it from the hub. And we're going to try and slide that whole thing back and off. I don't know that I need to remove the lower ball joint in order to get that. I don't know if there's going to be enough clearance or not. I don't want to put any more pressure on the brake line. I don't want to pull that out too far. I just need to pull it out far enough to separate that drive shaft to get it released from the hub and pull it out. So I've got the wheel turned all the way. You can, once the battery's out, you can put the key in and leave the ignition unlocked so you can move the wheel back and forth to get the spindle in the position you need to. So essentially that's what I've got unbolted. I haven't released the lower ball joint, and I will let you know if I need to do that in order to get this drive shaft out or not. I'll let you know in a minute. Oh, before we do anything, I might as well start this first. That big bolt you see there, I think it's a 17. That is the transmission drain plug, so we're going to have to drain that before we pull this axle out, or else all the fluid's going to come out all over us. And if you go all the way toward the front, the big one there is the fill plug. And that cable hanging there is the ground strap that we unhooked earlier. So I'm going to take that off, that 17mm bolt, and take the fluid out, drain the fluid out, and then try and work this axle out of the spindle, and I will let you know if I need to do anything further than what we've done so far. Okay, the lower pinch bolt on the ball joint is not necessary to remove because we're not removing the ball joint, that lower ball joint. It can be left in that 14mm bolt. The three 10mm bolts that hold in the ABS sensor wire here and here, there's two there, and there's one for the brake line. Remove those three, and that will allow this whole assembly to rotate down far enough. I've put the wheel under it so it won't fall down, and managed to pop the axle out. So the axle is now all the way out. I've drained the fluid, and we're popping the drive shaft out in 2 seconds. So I'm going to take a look at how that's accessed and if I can get in there, and back in a second. Oh, this really sucks working in the sun today because it is almost 100 degrees here today, about 36 Celsius. So yeah, it's a little warm. So I'm going to take 15 minutes and have myself a squirting oranges. Vodka that I'm not even going to feel. But I'm hoping we are about a third to a halfway done. I think we're about a third at this point. Basically, we have to remove the drive shaft now, and then separate the transmission from. I don't know if we have to take the starter out or not. I don't know if I haven't crawled under and looked at that. Being this hot, I'm also going to check my jack stand to make sure it's not sinking into the pavement, which is dangerous. So anyway, back in a minute. Okay, so I've had my break and the sun left me in shadow here, which is much better. So I'm taking a crowbar, pry bar, whatever you can get into here, because they don't give you much room around the back of this axle shaft, this drive shaft. And I want to hook behind the axle shaft, make sure you're not on the boot, and give it a quick pop. Sorry, I bumped you. A quick pop is all it'll take with whatever you can get under there to pop it out. That might be a little long. Let's try a shorter one. Come on. There we go. And now it is all about the spring clip. Let's hope the spring clip stayed on the end and is not left. And this is the spring clip. Sorry. This is the spring clip we're talking about here on the end of the axle shaft. That hopefully remains on yours. So let's pull that out. Oh, good. Now I think it is time to remove a transmission. We might have a couple more bolts. I don't think there's anything. Actually, there are two more to remove. Let me show you those. Up from underneath. Try and get the sun glare out of your eyes. This mount right here for this electrical connector. I don't know if I can just pop that off. You know, it's just a 12, maybe 13 or 14 millimeter bolt. I'm just going to take that bolt off because there's two connectors there and there that are attached to that. So let's get that out of the way. We'll just take that bolt off, and that will take those, remove those two connectors. And now I'm going to prop up the engine so I can remove the transmission. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, while I'm down there taking out this connector, I'm also going to take off the 4 14mm bolts that hold this lower transmission mount in place. We've still got the upper one holding the transmission there. This is kind of a locator, keeps it from moving forward to backwards. So we can take these 4 bolts out of there while I'm down here, and that'll give me access to get to some of the other transmission bolts as well. And they are 14s. I think I need a deeper socket to get to the next one. I do. And then these 2 are 14s. Okay, back in a minute. Okay, apparently you can't get the second cross member bolt out of the back there without taking this joint off. I did take the 2 back bolts off, but you can't get it out. You have to take that center, what do you call it? Like bearing bolt or whatever. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. It's a 17 mil, so I'm going to take that off, pull that pin out, the bolt out, and that should slip off and allow me to get the 2 bolts, mounting bolts underneath. Back in a bit. Sorry, my radio's on in the background and I'm not getting out of here to go turn it off. I'm just going to remove all the 14mm bolts around the outside of the bell housing here. And again, this mount is gone. I've now got a jack underneath the engine pan with a hockey puck between the jack and the pan to make sure not to damage it. And that's just taking a bit of weight off the transmission, because as you can see, the whole thing can move now with this locator off. Still got the main mount up there bolted on, and I do think we're going to have to take this hydraulic line where it goes to the top of the mount. I think that's going to have to come off with a 12mm bolt, but I'll do that when I get back up there. I'm going to do all these bottom bolts while I'm down here. Also, separating the passenger side drive shaft, or the right side drive shaft, the other side drive shaft, just again with a small pry bar or screwdriver. Stick it in underneath and give it a quick whack, and it will pop that out. It just needs to be popped out. It doesn't need to be pulled all the way out. It just needs to be separated so it will be loose when we pull the transmission out. So I'm going to loosen all these bolts and find them all and loosen them all. The ones on the bottom are bell housing, or sorry, engine side going toward the transmission. The ones on the top are transmission side going toward the engine. So once we get all these bottom ones out, we'll move up to the top. So looking around the top bolts, this is the top one on the engine, just underneath one of the water hoses. There's another electrical mount with a 14mm bolt through it. That's one of the bell housing bolts, so you have to remove, when you remove that electric wire is going to come out, but just make sure you do remember to get that one. It's kind of hard to see, and we're just going to go around the top and get the rest of the bolts, hopefully. You know what the funny thing is? I can't frame the freaking starter on this car. Honest to God, I can't see it yet. And I'm wondering where the hell it is, because usually I have to pull a starter to pull a bell housing, but I don't see the damn starter. Haven't seen it yet. No hiding her hair. Anyway, that's the other, this bolt here that my wrench is pointing to. That 12mm is the other one you're going to have to take off for that, for this hydraulic line. And you're probably going to have to use a wrench to take that off, because you can't get past a hydraulic line with a socket. So we're going to take that off as well. Okay, that socket is on one of the top 2 bolts for the bell housing. There's 17 mils, that one, and the other one that held in that wire loom on this side, that was a 17. So the top 2 are 17s, while the other ones are 14s. Right beside that, you can see there's an empty hole behind that to the right. That rounded protrusion there, that's the starter. That's the upper starter bolt, it's a 14. And the lower one is just down below it. If you see that red bungee strap at the top of the screen, to the rightmost part of that bungee strap, underneath that, there is another 14mm bolt that has to come out, and that is the other starter bolt. Not a great access spot, but I don't know if you can get to it from underneath better. I don't think so. So anyway, I'm going to get that out and I'll be back. Okay, starter bolts out. All of the bell housing bolts, as far as I can tell, are out. The last two to take out were those two 17s on the top. I've got a jack under the transmission, a jack under the engine holding the engine up, and the last thing is these 17mm bolts on the engine mount, or the transmission holder. And I'm going to take those out and lower the transmission, and you have to wiggle it to the front and then out. And I'll be back in a minute with that after I've got that out. Okay, so it's taking me about 15 minutes to wiggle the transmission. Let me grab a light. Wiggle it into this position. I've got a steel pipe across the two fender wells, mounted on steel on both sides of the steel channels, and then a tie strap tying it down, and I've just lowered it enough so that I can get the clutch out. I don't need to take that whole thing out and then try and twist it back in, because it's a bit of a bitch to do that. So then there's 6 bolts, 6 12mm bolts on the pressure plate, which is right there, the rusty looking thing with the little fingers on it. Let's try and pop that out. And you can get to the bolts by taking the bolts out and then grab the flywheel and turn. Okay, so I'm going to have to pry that out a little bit with a screwdriver, because it's over top of these little pins. It's been in there for however many years. So I'm going to pop that out and be back in 1 second. Underneath that is the friction disc, and we can easily swap out the bearing down inside there. Reach down and swap out the release bearing. So I'm going to pull that pressure plate off, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I loosened it off, and I'm just going to pull off the pressure plate. I'm going to try to pull it off. Come on, wiggle, wiggle, you'll come off.
Yeah, I know. So this is going to be the worst captain in Star Trek history. It's too bad that the female captain had to be the worst. It really was bad.
Okay, I can't get it. I need 2 hands for this. Anyway, you can see what I'm doing. I'm pulling the pressure plate off. Slide it out, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, old pressure plate and friction disc. You can call it that. There's the old one. There's the new one. There's not much friction disc left. So this side goes toward, it's pointing to us, of course, it goes toward the engine, toward the flywheel, and the other side goes toward the transmission. And when you're putting it on, you'll see there's these wider spring spaces here with the big spring on them. The bolts go on either side of the big notch, the big spring, and then there's a pin that goes in between the center, the middle, and then bolt. So the bolts go, there's 6 bolts, they go on either side of that wide opening when you put it back in. So I'm going to put that in, put the bolts in gently, and then put the alignment tool in, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, pressure plate and friction disc are in, and you can see in the middle that little alignment tool has been pressed in, and you put that in and align it to make sure the disc is aligned in the center. And you do that before you tighten all the bolts. Put the bolts in and then tighten them little by little until you get to about 11 foot-pounds. Like tighten each one a little tiny bit and get to 11 to 12 foot-pounds. And once you're done that, we'll be back. Now it's kind of hard to show you this because it's way deep down inside. But you just reach in, grab the throwout bearing. It's attached to the shaft. You can feel it in there. Grab it and pull it out. It's held on in these 2 little arms. And we will grab the new one and throw it on. Actually, with this bearing, it's locked on to the forks. There's like a little 2-finger fork, like my fingers like this, and you stick it in and then turn and lock it onto the fork, and you'll feel it when it's locked on there, when it can't move, when it's moving the arm in with it. So the new one's in there, and now it's just time to hoist. I have to grease the splines on the shaft inside here that the bearing is around. There's the spline shaft that looks like your drive shaft. Splines grease came with the kit. Grease that and grease this hole where the splines go into, one or the other or both. And then we're going to slip this transmission back in, which is going to take probably about 15-20 minutes because I'm doing it myself. And it's a bugger to line up. And I will be back. Okay, I had to step away for a few hours, so it's now 10 o'clock at night. But I got to finish this thing up anyway. So I popped both axles back in. And I'm just tightening everything back up. Torque specs, about 35 to 40 foot-pounds on all of the bolts that hold the transmission to the bell, or the bell housing and transmission to the engine. This big bolt here is 94 foot-pounds. 80 foot-pounds for the mounts on the top holding that end of the transaxle, the one that holds the big mount that holds it to the top. That's 80 foot-pounds. Which is these bolts right here on the mount. These ones right here, those are 80 foot-pounds. The two top bolts on the strut are 120 foot-pounds, holding the strut to the spindle. If you took out the bottom one, which you don't really have to, that's 45 foot-pounds, the 14mm bolt on the bottom, the pinch bolt, or sorry, 52 foot-pounds. And then the little 10mm bolts are like 10 foot-pounds a piece. The ones holding everything else on those are just pretty simple. Those aren't, don't crank the crap out of them. And that is about it. Same with the starter bolts, are about 50 foot-pounds. Or sorry, 40 foot-pounds for the starter bolts. So all the 14mm bolts on the underside of the transmission. And I've got about 2 hours of bolting everything back together. You know, you've taken it apart. If you've gotten this far, you've taken it apart, you know how it goes all back together. So other than the torque specs, that's about all you need. Refill the transmission about 2 liters, fill through the top fill hole till it spills out. You need a GL4 transmission fluid or a GL4-5 and 75-90 weight. And you need about 2 liters. And you fill through the top hole, not the drain bolt, but the top hole that we saw earlier. You fill through there till it spills, till it starts to overflow. And then you'll know it's full. Anything else to tell you? No, that's about it. Oh, the main axle nut torque. I haven't put the main axle nut back on. I gotta check the torque spec on that. The big axle nut holding the front axle in. I will get that for you in a minute once everything else is said and done. Well, I couldn't finish up last night because I was gonna make too much noise putting everything back together. It was 2 in the morning when I finished. Last thing is the center axle nut, the 33mm nut. Tighten it to between 180 and 200 foot-pounds of torque, and then with a cold chisel bang the end of the nut into that little groove there to lock it in. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you made it through this.